Hi, welcome to Quid Pros Quo. I'm Zac.
And I'm Rin.
And today we are talking about pragmatic world building. So I suggested this topic, and when I did, Rin was like,
I know what those words mean individually, but not together.
yeah. So this came to me when I was doing a little bit of reading about pragmatism, which is a philosophy or a way of looking at humans as being problem solvers. So looking at decisions that humans make and looking at social institutions by asking, what problem are you trying to solve? And I realized, oh my goodness, this is perfect for world building. And you mean it comes up inside of, like Tumblr posts talking about writing tips and that sort of thing. But I decided to call it pragmatic world building.
So you've coined a new term. Look at you go. You can go to writing conferences and talk about this. I know,
right?
This is exciting.
Sweet. So really there are two steps going on with pragmatic world building. And the first thing is to identify the problems that need solving. So all civilizations and all societies are going to face some similar problems where, you have to ask questions about where they're going to get food, where are they going to get water, how are they going to make their clothes, et cetera, et cetera. If you are if you're writing speculative fiction, whether it's science fiction or fantasy, let's take urban fantasy for example. And for whatever reason, magic users don't want non-magic users to know that they exist. Just as an example, which you will never see in any media whatsoever. Can you hear myself as I'm rolling my eyes? But if that's the problem, then the problem is, how do we remain secret, right? Mm-hmm. And then the next step is to say, okay, what is the solution to this? How do they get food? How do they get water? How do they remain secret? And by talking about and thinking about the solutions to those problems, you can also demarcate in between cultures. So maybe, for example, if one group of magic users says, oh, the way that we're going to remain secret is that we're going to create these areas where you can use magic and then everywhere else you can't, that's going to give flavor to that particular group. Whereas another group who says, oh, well, we'll just use magic at night because less people are awake at night, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that can lead to interesting tension in between civilizations and in between characters when you're actually writing your novel.
Already I'm getting this idea of a Romeo and Juliet story where it's oh, you can only do magic in this place, and then this other character's you can only do magic at night, and then it leads to these big cultural clashes and again, very Romeo and Juliet.
Mm-hmm. And that process that I just described can be repeated however many times you want. And sometimes when you talk about a solution, it can bring up new problems. So with the example of, we're going to we're going to partition certain areas where people can use magic. Well, then you have another problem. First of all, how are you going to partition those areas? And second of all, how are you going to get access to the land? So, maybe you go for we'll curse it or whatever, so that if people wander in, they'll just wander out the other end kind of thing.
Yeah, like a fairy circle.
Right. Or maybe you do something a little bit more, I don't know, this feels kind of more grimdarky, but you have people infiltrate banking systems or accumulate a whole bunch of wealth in order to buy the land, and then they build walls around it kind of thing. And again, those two different solutions to the problem result in different things, and you can still propagate it outward. Well, if there's one person who owns the land, how does that, what sort of problems does that present for people who are using the land in order to practice magic?
Yeah.
Or with the fairy circle, the problem could be, how does the society outside of the fairy circle react to people who encounter it, right?
Yeah.
Is it sort of like an Independence Day thing where they make fun of the guy or the girl and just kind of ostracize them? Or, how does the surrounding society deal with that?
Yeah. And the thing that's coming to mind right now is Brandon Mull's Fablehaven.
Yes.
Where you have all these magical reserves for magical creatures. Mm-hmm. But then the main conflict, at least in the later books if I'm remembering correctly, is the magical creatures want out of the reserves.
It's been so long since I read those
I know.
books. I'm
It's
willing
been forever.
to take it on faith.
There's a sequel series.
I know, and I kind of want to read it, but I'm also
I've read the first book or two, but it sounds good. Oh, I'll talk about my issues with Brandon Mull another time.
Okay.
But, like, if you can make it so it's, like, you also have the approach of, like, just putting a veil over the world, like, Percy Jackson and the Olympians does this. They call it the mist.
Yes.
Where, like, the non-magical people, like, interact with it, but they don't see, like, what's really going on. Like, in Percy Jackson, they see a pen instead of a sword, even if the Riptide is in sword form.
Yeah.
Or, like, you have to, like, drink the magic milk in Fablehaven to, like,
be able to see the fairies. Yes.
Exactly. So that's another way you can address how to hide the magic.
Right, and so you can do whatever kinds of problems that you want. If you're doing for example, sci-fi, and the problem is how do we colonize other worlds, there are tons of options for how you can go about doing that. Oh, well, we'll do colony ships, or we'll do suspended animation, or we'll do cryogenics.
Cryogenics. Okay, I was going to say cryogenesis, but I was like, that doesn't sound right to me.
I don't know. Maybe you can. Maybe those two words would fit together in certain contexts. I'm not quite sure what that context would be, but
who knows?
It sounds
I'll put it in my notes app.
There, new term. You can go work. You can go talk.
It autocorrected to cryogenesis. Cry-genesis. But yeah. Problems can be both personal and communal. Like, a personal question is more like, how do people, like, form families, and where do families live? Whereas communal could be like, what do we do with our, like, waste? Is like, that's a much bigger problem, especially as societies grow and get larger.
Yep.
I have this example from an old Tumblr post that I can't find anywhere. It's probably somewhere on one of my writing Pinterest boards, but I have like 3 of those. So it's the idea of pragmatic world building without using the term pragmatic world building. Like, okay, so what if you have, like, a city and you want a sacred animal and you choose doves? And then you're like, yeah, now there are doves everywhere. And then they're not seen as pests. They're, like, sacred animals, as previously stated. But then when you think about if you have, like, a city full of doves, then there's bird poop everywhere.
Right.
And then it's like you have all these, like, public health issues, and it's just a huge mess. So maybe, like, to solve this problem, and, like, hopefully the city accounts for this, they actually have, like, great cleaning systems and, like, people to keep everything clean. And instead of, like, having, like, cleaning bird poop be, like, something that is, like, looked down on, it's actually, like, a position of respect in the society.
Right.
So you can see how pragmatic world building lends itself not just to environmental world building, but also social world building.
Yes. And so, we talked about food, water, clothing, keeping magic secret. How do you take care of the birds? Like, there are so many different problems that might establish themselves inside of a society or inside of an interpersonal context. And I was realizing that in the same way that a society's responses to these problems helps define the culture of the society, it's a similar thing that the way that characters attempt to solve problems, exemplifies their character. Like, that's not, earth-shattering. It's kind of obvious.
Yeah.
But again, apply it out to the society. And if the character of the society is such that, we're going to respect the people who clean up after the sacred animals, that is going to influence the way that they think about other things as well. In pragmatism, this is called a rule or a habit, where after you have a solution to a problem, you start to generalize it and apply it to other things.
Yeah. Well, that's super cool. Do you have anything else you want to talk about with pragmatic world building?
No, I don't think so. I think I sometimes get irritated when I see lists of, like, these are things that you should flesh out for your world building. And while I don't recommend actually pulling up those lists and, like, answering every single question, because I think some of them are dumb, but you can still use elements of it to find interesting problems or to ask interesting questions about characters and the societies that they live in. So those are good resources to go to be like, I don't, Zac and Rin, this sounds really cool, but I don't know what problems people are attempting to solve, kind of thing. And those are good places to start.
Yeah, and I would also add that just because you do all this world building, it doesn't actually have to make it into your book.
Yes.
Like, maybe in, like, the Dove example, like, that's a focal point of, like, the city, and that would make it in. But I feel like a lot of books, like, they don't actually care where they get, like, food, water, and clothing. Like, it's just, like, kind of accepted that it's there and they have a solution.
Mm-hmm.
So, and, like, in my Wonderland books, I'm, like, I haven't done very much pragmatic world building because it's like, oh, there's magic. It's just kind of like...
And it's Wonderland.
It's Wonderland, exactly. Like, if I did all this, like, nitty-gritty world building, it wouldn't feel as whimsical.
Right.
So,
we're about to say hard world building, and that's exactly what it is the hard...
Yes,
like,
exactly.
The hard world building rather than the soft world building.
So, so use your resources, address the problems that have come out of it, and remember that you need to know these things, or maybe you don't need to know these things if you're writing Wonderland. But even if you need to know them, your readers don't necessarily need to know them. You don't want to bog down your book.
If I could give an example of knowing something about the society that isn't crucial but still adds flavor, I think about Omashu in the
Avatar:
The Last
Last Airbender,
where you have this system of transporting goods through earthbending and moving these sleds of earth filled with stuff, and it adds to the aesthetic of the world, but it also ends up presenting a solution to, we need to get away really quickly, so what do? We get onto the conveyor belt system.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, that's a great example. I think we're out of time this week, but we'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to Quid Pros Quo.